Listen.
Would you like to see a magic trick?
Yeah.
So Blumhouse has a new movie and a new logo that I thought was pretty dope because they're just flexing all the franchises that they have at this point as they try to add another one. This one comes from the director who did Doctor Strange and then left the Marvel Multiverse but continued with his own madness. But I don't think it's as scary as his previous horror movie, Sinister. To me, Black Phone feels more like a thriller with horror elements sprinkled in because even one of the characters tells you straight up, you need blood. You know, for the audience. And I guess it includes a couple of goofy jump scares too.
The creepiest damn thing.
They've been calling it Sinister Siblings since they keep a lot of the same visuals and style, but this one is also actually a story about siblings. I'd say that if you wanted something really dreadful, then go catch Sinister, but surprisingly, if you want something a lot more positive, then I'd say catch this one, because they almost treat it like a coming-of-age horror movie, to the point that the director had the kids watching 400 Blows. So, if you haven't seen it and are interested, I'm about to get into full spoilers, so go check it out.
Then I'll come back and explain everything.
So the movie takes place in 1970s Denver, where a man known as the Grabber has been driving around with black balloons, snatching up kids. We meet Finney, a baseball pitcher whose mint arm will come into play later, but in the meantime, he's so focused on getting to second base with his crush that the other team keeps scoring home runs on him. 5 kids so far have been taken, including the batter Bruce, and that makes Eisenberg Jr. so scared that he doesn't even like his sister talking about it.
Even the papers call him the Grabber. Just which one says that?
And yet, this boy walks right up to the creepy dude in a black van. Like, did your sister even tell you about the balloons?
Are you listening to this?
Yes, I'm listening.
I think what makes the setting of the movie so eerie is that it's actually based on the writer's own backstory. For one, director Scott Derrickson grew up in Denver, which is why it always comes up in his movies.
Cold Denver morning, you got it wrong.
So that idea of a bunch of serial killers going through his state while he's growing up is something that stuck with him when he thinks of the past. On top of that, they wrote The Missing Kids with the memories of their actual childhood friends and all of their attributes. On top of that, those memories were pretty dark.
For me, growing up in North Denver in the late 70s, the Manson murders had just happened. Ted Bundy had killed a bunch of women and escaped in Colorado. My next door neighbor, a friend of mine, came to my door when I was 9, knocked on the door, I opened it, and he was crying and he said somebody murdered my mom. And his mother had been abducted and raped and wrapped in phone cord and wrapped and thrown in the local lake.
So after Bruce the baseball player gets taken and Robin the bully beater gets taken, little Finney doesn't really stand a chance. Luckily, he has a cool sister named Gwen who's supposed to be 2 years younger than him, but she fights like she's served 25. And this actress, Madeleine McGraw, wasn't even going to be in the movie since she was scheduled to be in a Disney show, but the director loved how she auditioned that cop scene so much that he waited to film the movie, and now every showing cracks up at that fart knocker line. On top of that, there's a scene between her and the alcoholic father that she has where he's whipping her for claiming to have dream visions like her mother did, and they claim that that final back and forth was improvised.
I had a dream about it.
A cool thing that they do with her dreams is that they actually shot it on Super 8 film, which is why it looks gorgeous, but where Sinister used it to kind of have that found footage style that made it really creepy, here it kind of feels like a supernatural thriller where she's working with the detectives to find clues. They also do a good job at cutting between all the stuff on TV, so the kids will go from watching Davy and Goliath to a clever transition of the show Emergency when another kid gets taken, but those damn jump scares, man. It really is all sound. Like, the characters don't even see the ghosts. They're just popping up to spook the audience. And a lot of the times, you see them coming from a mile away. But you just gotta, like, sit there and brace for the impact of that loud riser sound. That's it. The standout, easily, is Ethan Hawke as the Grabber. Let me explain.
I just wanted to look at you.
First off, you got the masks. They got the legend Tom Savini to come in with his team and create over 40 different masks that I'm guessing the Grabber has lying around. There's clear inspiration to theater masks and older movies like London After Midnight, which is infamous for there being no copies since that burned in a fire. But besides the Babadook look, what makes it so unsettling is how it splits his emotions. So you'll see what looks like a neutral mask. There's one with a wicked smile, there's a sad one, and there's supposed to be like 3 parts to it. One that covers his eyes, another part that covers his nose or his mouth, and they've even mentioned Bob Dylan as being a big inspiration for how they approach the mask in a setting.
When somebody's wearing a mask, he's going to tell you the truth. When he's not wearing a mask, it's highly unlikely.
Not to mention, Ethan loves starring in Blumhouse movies, dying in the first one, and then having the mask make a fortune.
It's an iconic look now, too. I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of them popping up Halloween.
I bet we will.
Now, the movie does have a lot of what I would call the it factor. I don't think Stephen King owns yellow raincoats, floating balloons, and kids with premonitions in the 70s getting tormented.
Big dog, like Cujo Big.
But it is interesting to note that the short story that the movie's based on is by Joe Hill, Stephen King's son.
You know, when I was 10 years old, I remember watching TV and seeing C-3PO and R2-D2 go up the red carpet to the premiere of Empire Strikes Back at the Chinese theater, and now I'm all grown up, and they're showing the black phone here. It's pretty unbelievable. Sometimes life is amazing.
Not to mention, the short did have the grabber as a clown originally, but they claimed that it was a John Wayne Gacy. You know, he was back in the news, so they had to switch him to being a
part-time magician.
And just like that,
It's gone.
I do like how the whole movie focuses in on the kid's perspective, so the way that they're seeing the grabber is pretty much based off of all the stories that they've been telling about him in school. You know, it's really heavy on the folklore. Like, you don't really learn anything about the grabber either when Finney's locked up. It's just a couple of clues here and there, so you pretty much know that there's some trauma the grabber's had, and clearly he feels shame, and that's why he's so uncomfortable without the mask. But you can also fully see it from Finney's perspective and what it's like to have an alcoholic parent who goes through different phases on a daily, and you never know what you're gonna get.
I could make up what the black phone means to him and what that basement means to him and what might have happened to him and how he got so broken. But it doesn't matter because he is broken. And now he's hurting other people.
Doesn't work. Not since I was a kid.
One of the sickest things the grabber does is he feeds the kids he's keeping captive, but then leaves the door open so that he baits them into going upstairs where he's waiting with a belt. And then they kind of leave the rest of the game that he calls Naughty Boy up to interpretation, but they definitely focus on how all the missing kids have long hair that he likes to play with.
I made you some breakfast.
What'd you put in that?
Salt and pepper.
Now, you know they'll probably answer his whole backstory when, you know, you get like the eventual prequel, Black Phone 4, The Dead Zone, but it's definitely creepy that you don't know if it's his upbringing that made him that way, you know? Or even scarier, that he did have a childhood that was fine and he still snapped. Ethan Hawke even talked about how there was a method to what masks he would wear in what scenes, but he didn't know. Like, there's something creepy about the fact that Derrickson used something from his upbringing to know exactly what the grabber would be wearing at a certain time. There's then the newspaper bit.
Tell me your name.
Taylor.
I was really starting to like you, Finney.
It's kind of sick how the grabber already knew he was going to be disappointed, so he had the mask ready, but this whole bit just proves how bad the news is with trying to get a story out there, to the point that they end up giving the kidnappers themselves all the info they need.
I have an announcement to make. One of our students, Finney Blake, was abducted.
The whole time Finn's locked up, he keeps hearing voices from this unconnected black phone that's in the cellar, and for a while, it felt like all the advice he was given is really just him figuring out by himself, you know? All the voices did was tell him where to go, but they never actually started digging or freeing up the window. It kind of feels like Finn did a trial and error to figure all that out. It's almost like they collectively make up the stories that were told about the grabber, and now he's trying to avenge all of them. At one point, he almost escapes getting out the back door while the grabber's snoozing, but then he gets caught in the last minute. And listen, you're telling me that while there's an epidemic of missing children, when all these parents have been informed and even have a late night call chain for updates, that none of the neighbors thought to check on the black van parked on the sidewalk?
You don't think the town deserves an explanation?
You can never explain something like this.
Finn gets relocked up as the voices continue to give him advice or just bully him, and then he almost finds a way out through a freezer that was locked, but for a second I thought they actually freeze-dried these kids. We then get introduced to this character named Max, who pops up for like 2 scenes as a guy who's so infatuated with the case that he's moved in with his brother because he really wants to help the cops solve it, and he's actually appeared in both Sinisters where he did in fact have a badge.
Thank you very much, Deputy So-and-so.
But when we find out that he's the grabber's brother who's staying with him, I was like, how? It was already dumb enough that the lock the grabber was using was the Paperboy's lock we kidnapped and he just never got a new one. But now you're telling me that the brother was staying with him and didn't think any of this stuff was weird around him while he's investigating the exact same case? I guess it's pointing out that with crazy scenarios like this, sometimes it's right under our noses and we don't even know it. Especially when the character has other things under his nose.
Look what you made me do.
On the outside, the sister ends up having more dreams than Paul Atreides that literally leads her to the house her brother's being held captive in. Or at least the house across the street, because they pulled the Silence of the Lambs and it turns out Grabber has a separate house to bury the bodies. Now to me, there's a sort of clash with the supernatural and grounded elements. You know, I think it mixes well to be entertaining, but at some point, you're making the serial killer out to be scary because he's so grounded and based off of real people. But then it's the magical element that saves the day. day. Like, their dad even mentioned that the mom, who was hearing voices, wasn't solving cases with it. It ended up leading her to taking her own life. If they can hear the voices of the dead kids, can they hear the voice of the mother? There's a lot of stuff that gets really unanswered and is just there to almost wrap things up nicely, but one thing's for sure, they weren't solving that case if it wasn't for her pulling a Joseph.
The tree, the door, the gate, I'd never seen it before except in my dream.
Finn is able to dig a massive hole that traps the grabber as he falls in and twists his ankle, and then Finn uses the phone to smack him in the head the same way he had that pitching rotation that he's had since the beginning, as he finally stands up for himself the way he should have to his father and for his sister.
You remember what I told you?
There's someday I have to stand up for myself.
Someday is today, Finn.
In the end, the whole school now talks about Finn as a hero, as he's become part of the folklore, because if everyone was hyped with Robin beating up a bully, imagine Finn, who killed the killer.
And a phone rang in the basement. It's a very dark, dank, dirt floor basement, and I was upset, obviously, but I, went down with a flashlight, and there was a black phone on the wall that was ringing. And I went and answered it, and it was Jason Blum. And that guy managed to get somebody to install a black phone in my basement without me knowing it, and then called me on it. And he has it set to where if I just pick the phone up, it just automatically dials his cell phone. So it's still there. I kept it.
Thank you all for checking out this video. I'm curious to know your thoughts down below in the comment section. They've been talking about having not a Sinister 3, but a Sinister TV series, so that may be something that's in the work. And I know Joe Hill pitched an idea for a sequel for Black Phone 2. It should be interesting. Having that serial killer ghost story kind of combined can be fleshed out to be even bigger. So I'm so curious to see what to do with it, even if not everything works for me. I really like that idea of the dead not just looking like Manson, but all the premonitions that Finn had, like even the bottle at the end that's spinning, as goofy as it is that's like one of the kids who couldn't speak kind of communicating to him. You also have that idea that the bottle could be, all the callbacks to the times he had to go take the bottle out of his dad's hand before it dropped, and that leads to the, metaphors to what the black balloons could be. But, I really like what the movie represents, and I think it's still a fun little thriller to catch, but some of the horror elements, that they didn't do it for me. But I'm curious to know other people's thoughts. What worked for you? What are your interpretations of it? Would you like to see more of the grabber? I'm so glad they didn't call it the grabber and called it the black phone. But any of those thoughts down below in the comment section. I would highly recommend checking out The Tingler. I caught that one. It's free on Tubi, and that was a movie that was mentioned. Classic movie, old, but I think still delivers. And I would also put Summer of '84 on your radar if you like this movie. That was one that we caught at Sundance at its premiere a while ago. It comes from the people who did Turbo Kid, and it kind of has that same field of not looking back at the nostalgia of the 80s and 70s, but kind of showing you that it was kind of messed up. So until next time, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section, and don't be a fart knocker. Comment, like, and subscribe, or else that phone won't stop ringing.